Good day, ma'am. I am Michelle Bang from BSed English 3A. Today, I am going to discuss about traditional literary criticism. Traditional literary criticism is an approach to the analysis and interpretation of literature that has been practiced for centuries. It evaluates an author's biographical information, their culture, background, and history. Traditional literary criticism is above all criticism. It was used throughout the world in different countries and cultures, such as in Asia and Greece. So it has been around as far as ancient times. It was mostly used in describing arts and poetry, such as Shakespeare, but evolved to the various literary criticisms see today. So, traditional literary on criticism evaluates an author's biographical information, their culture, background, and history. So, to analyze how the author's life shown in the work, in which author have made choose that to include events, people, or places to serve as influences in their literary work. The author may also include their characteristic, thought, and emotions. So, traditional critics also feel that it helps to be familiar with authors' past works, if there are any. They have determined that every writer has a unique style, a certain way with prose and or structure that makes him or her different from everyone else. So, you examine how the author's life, his other biographical information is reflected in the work. So, you research all the facets of his or her background and find traces of his or her experiences shown in the text. So, next, I will tackle about formalism and new criticism. So, formalism refers to all approaches to art that privileges of focus on form and style, while new criticism was a specific literary movement that developed in America in mid-20th century. So even within the field of literary studies, new criticism was not the first formalist movement. Russian formalism, for instance, and predated new criticism by about 30 years. New critics stressed the value of close readings, which meant that the form and style of a poem or novel should be only focused on or of a critic's attentions. So, new critics dismiss writing that focus on historical or social context for adopting an approach that moved the writer further away from the work under consideration. So, they believe that focusing on form as opposed to feeling and history. So, it offered the possibility of producing an objective reading of a poem's meaning. So, new criticism reached its peak in popularity in the years following World War II. So, universities across the countries adopted new criticism approaches to literature in the years that followed. So, for advocates of this style of criticism, new criticisms emphasizes on producing objective readings of poem, providing the use way to demystify the act of writing about literature. This was viewed as especially important since the passing of the Guild Bill allowed many first generation college students to enter the university system. So, new criticism developed as a reaction to the older philological and literary historical school for the U.S. North, which focused on the history and meaning of individual words and their relation to foreign and ancient languages. So, comparative sources and the biographical circumstances of the author, taking these approaches under influence of the 19th century German scholarship. The new critics felt that this approach tended to distract from the text and meaning of a poem and entirely neglect its aesthetic qualities in favor of teaching about external factors. On the other hand, the new critics discouraged the literary appreciation school, which limited itself to pointing out the beauties and morally elevating qualities of the text. as too subjective and emotional. Next is Marxism and critical theory. So, criticism is uncovering of relationship of domination and exploitation, even when they are disguised in idealistic term. So, Charles Bird has analyzed the American Revolution in Marxist critical terms by arguing how ultimately by the self-interest of moneyed class drove the political revolution. So, Marxist critical literary theory focus on socio-economic relationships. So, critical literary works present relationship of economic domination in clear terms. This can be accomplished in original works of literature with critical thesis or in secondary literature on oppressive ideology present in literature. So, Marxist criticism has been influential for critical theory. So, next is critical theory addresses power relationships. One its tenets is that institution practices and rules that disadvantage some group or over others have an intentional element. So these features of society are tools used by the oppressors. Marxist critical theory is a species of critical theory that emphasizes how social classical establishes hierarchical power structures. Both Marxist critical theory and critical theory is general advocate for various means of combating oppression and increasing the freedom of marginalized or oppressed groups. Marxist literary theory asks about system of social and economic power through literary and cultural works. Marxist criticism is an approach to theory and literary commentary that questions society and culture. As part of its analysis of class struggle, it emphasizes the alienation inherent in the modes of production and exchange inherent in capitalist society. Next is structuralism and post-structuralism. So, structuralism was a literary movement primarily concerned with understanding how language works as a system of meaning production. So, it focusing on the form or structure of the literary work and the particular use of language in the work would allow structuralists to think of language as a kind of science. Next is post-structuralism. So, on the other hand, is less singularly defined as a movement than structuralism. A number of literary theories fall under the larger umbrella of post-structuralism, including gender theory and reader response theories. So these theories recognize the overarching notion that meaning does not exist outside of the text and that meaning is not fixed but rather contingent and unstable. Post-structuralism evolved alongside Jacques Derrida's theory of the deconstruction, which emphasizes this concept of unstable, unfixed meaning as it functions in language. Post-structuralism emerges in this context. It recognizes this lack of fixed or inherent meaning and yet also acknowledging the need for language to acquire meaning.